Hello, my friend. So, finally, we come to Freud's view of evil. And it's actually quite shocking because, of course, Freud's view of human nature has become quite widely spread and has impacted greatly on many of us. Certainly, I went through a phase where I read all of Freud and it dominated my existence, this worldview. Fortunately, I had breadth and perspective and many other philosophical views to compare his views to, and I could never quite take it seriously. You will see why. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, has the view that evil is neither a theological concept nor a moral failing of the soul or the person. He viewed what we call evil as the outward expression of primal, biological drives that society forces us to repress. In Freud's view, humans are not naturally good, very different to Rousseau, the exact opposite, or social animals even. For him, human beings are driven by aggressive instincts that civilization must constantly struggle to keep in check. Why would civilization do that if human beings are so full of this aggression? Anyway, his tripart structure of the mind is very important for understanding how this works, because he believed that there is an id, which is the unconscious reservoir of these primal desires, these wants, these needs operating along the pleasure principle, which is that you don't know the distinction between evil and good. You simply want what you want. You are driven by your aggressive and sexual impulses. But the ego, the rational, more conscious part of the mind, although actually part of the ego is also unconscious, deals with reality, and it is this reality that forces you to not just go for what you want, but to learn to postpone gratification. This is also aided by the superego, also part of which is unconscious. The superego are the internalized moral standards of civilization that come to you through your parents and through society. This is your conscience, which uses guilt to punish your ego for the id's impulses. It's a very crude mechanism, this tripart structure. And of course, evil occurs for Freud when the id bypasses the ego control and ignores the superego's restrictions, so that the person becomes impulsive, destructive, and functions with antisocial behavior. Later on in his career, after observing the damage of the First World War, he came up with an even more vicious idea, which is that not only are we driven by the life instinct, by the libido, by eros, because that life instinct actually drives you towards others, towards cooperation and creation, but we are also driven by thanatos, which means death, the death instinct. Now this, according to Freud, is an inherent drive toward destruction, aggression, and towards returning to an inorganic state. Now, I admire the way in which he came to realize that libido could not be the only driving force, but that there had to be a counter force, and that therefore there had to be eros and thanatos, because that gets into the sort of existential paradoxical realities. But of course, that struggle between eros and thanatos is the struggle between the instinct of life and the instinct of destruction for Freud. And cruelty and evil are then for him thanatos turned outward towards others rather than towards yourself. You can also turn it against yourself, by the way. Now, he spoke a lot about civilization, and in his really important book, Civilization and Its Discontents, he argued that civilization is a kind of compromise we reach, a kind of deal we make. We trade a portion of the happiness that we get if we fulfill our primal urges for the security we can obtain from living in society and building civilizations. But we pay a terrible price for the order we create, which is the price of repression of our natural aggression and the origin of our guilt, because we can't act on our evil impulses. We end up turning the aggression inwards. So the super ego haunts us with guilt when we offend against this. So the more civilized and good we try to be, and the more internally miserable and guilt-ridden we become. When evil erupts in the world, he thinks this is the return of the repressed. It is the repressed aggression and darkness that emerges from us because we can no longer keep it down. And these primal urges, when they come out too harshly, unless they are being sublimated in religion, in sports or art or in work, will erupt in violent or neurotic ways. And this is how wicked people are created. There are such things as people who cannot sublimate anymore and whose primal urges take over and harm the world. So that's the Freudian idea in a nutshell. Not a nice picture.